Welcome to Teleios Talk. My name is Wendell Martins. Today I'm doing something a little different. I'm interviewing John Nikkel. John Nikkel is a former pastor of a church I went to 30 years ago, so I've known him for quite a few years. When we moved to Portage la Prairie, ran across him here at this church too, so that was pretty exciting for me. He has known myself and Ali, who started the podcast with me, for many years. And so today I'm going to be talking with him a little bit about what led him to be a pastor, some of the things that he's seen changing in the church over the years, and maybe some suggestions as to what we as Christians can do to engage in our communities. So stay with us. I'm looking forward to this upcoming interview. All right, well, welcome here, John. I'm glad that you were able to join me today. We're going to start off just a little bit of telling me your background. So what was it that led you to becoming a pastor?
I was a junior high teacher. I was thoroughly enjoying my teaching career, and then I was at the junior high in Steinbach and quite enjoyed it. But then I had always said, I want to be obedient. If I notice the Spirit of God speaking to me, I want to be obedient to Him. So when the missions director came and talked to me about the Manitoba missions that needed a pastor in Cranberry Portage and a camp director, I had been involved in camp work for quite a few years over the years, so I was already quite involved with camping. I said we would pray about it, and over the winter with our care group we talked about it and we prayed about it, and then decided that if that was what God wanted us to go, then we would go that way.
Okay. I know that when you read the Old Testament and Moses is leading the people, his father-in-law comes to him and says, you need to have a group of people around you. You need a group of people to help you dealing with these people. So I hear you talking about your care group. Is that sort of how you've tried to work your ministry as well?
Very much so.
Okay.
We were very, very much involved with having the support of the care group that we were part of, and I was also on council at the church.
Okay.
And that council also, the pastor there especially, was very much in favor of being a mentor to me and giving me direction.
Okay, good. As you've been a pastor for so many years, when you look at how the church operates, have you seen any changes to worship style, and have they impacted how you draw from the different services?
It has changed significantly from when I was, of course, when I was first pastor. I was the pastor, and so I was leading song leader. I was everything there, and so that. But it was very traditional in those days, and then I went to seminary and went to a church in Ontario, and there again I recognized the change that was happening. We started with one service, and we had a very traditional service, but there was a group there that wanted a more contemporary service.
Yeah.
So we started with two services, one a contemporary service and one a traditional service, and it seemed to work out very well, at least for that time.
Okay. Now I know that I've seen changes in working from hymnal to the bound praise and worship books, and now we have everything on projector. Do you find that as we've moved away from printed music to more of choruses, that has also changed how we have worship in church?
One of the things that I've always enjoyed is harmony, the different parts of the of singing, and we've sort of gotten away from that sort of harmony thing because the hymn books, of course, had the four parts in it, and so we've sort of come away from that, and I miss that. I really do. I still try and harmonize every once in a while, even when we're doing off the sheets, but nevertheless, it's not the same as it was when we were using the hymn books. And I think in my tradition, the liturgy has never been a very significant part. Prayer has always been there.
Hmm.
The music, singing, and worshiping in song has always been a very important part. And then, of course, the major part of our service has always been the sermon. And
Hmm.
that has not really changed. I still think that that still becomes one of the major parts of our service today.
Okay. All right. So part of our history is that when I was at the church that you were pastoring, I was in a rock band, and we would practice in the sanctuary while you were trying to finish your sermons. So uh, there's got to have been a little bit of distraction there. But what I wonder sometimes is, as the church has come through the years and we've seen change, has there been a change in the focus theologically in what's being taught?
I'm not so sure about the change in philosophy or in theology. There's been quite a change in the way in which the way in which it is shared with the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, I'm familiar with quite a few different ways of presenting, especially the music. The
Yeah.
music has taken a huge change from what I was used to growing up
Yeah.
and how it is now. And I've tried to adjust, but I still love going back to some of the old hymns, and
Oh, yes.
it's still very much a part of me.
Yeah. I know when you listen to some of the older pastors, like there's audio recordings of Spurgeon, they're very word and verse focused, aren't they? Like they'll take a verse and they'll tear it apart and then they go through context. Whereas nowadays, when you have a sermon, it seems it's more like the TED Talk style, where someone has given a certain amount of time and now you need to entertain us. Do you feel that you see that in sermons, or is that not as big a deal?
Yeah, I think it has changed quite a bit in that way. Uh, uh, there are the exegetical sermons,
Mm-hmm.
which to me are more exegeting the word,
Yeah.
but there are also topical sermons. And so, very often, I think we've moved more into the topical sermons
Okay.
rather than the exegetical sermons.
Okay. Do you find that you miss or that you gain anything with the different styles, or do you feel both styles have their place?
I think both styles have their place. I think it is easier for new Christians to sort of have topics,
Yeah.
whereas those of us who are more mature, who have been there a longer time, would feel more comfortable with the exegetical kind
Mhm.
of sermons.
Okay.
So in my practice as a pastor, I've tried to do both.
Okay.
I've tried to work very carefully at some exegetical messages, and then I've also tried very much to do some topical ones.
Okay. Another thing that we see affecting or coming into the church is the cultural sort of ramifications and how that has affected the church. One of the things that I was discussing earlier was how we've seen the change in family, especially in the time that I've been alive, where family has become more segmented. So now you will see families in our churches who have they're larger. So they're two families that have come together, or there's families that have fallen apart. Do you think culture and the impact in culture has been positive for the church or negative to the church, or do you feel that there's another way of describing that?
It has definitely changed. There's been a change, I think, from first of all, the seating plan has very often been changed within
Yeah.
the church, making it more informal
Mm-hmm.
rather than formal, and also in many ways the presentation of the gospel has also become less formal and a little more openness to that. So there has been a change in how the message is being presented. There's
Okay.
no question about that. But I still think that it is followed very much the way the community is working with this thing. It's not a drastic change that we are implementing ourselves, but that's the way in which the relationships seems to be going.
Okay. In your time as a pastor, and maybe even the time before you became a pastor and you were working in school, were there things that you believed or opinions that you held that you found have changed up to this point in time in your life?
There have been a few things that have changed, and in my mind, I'm not, you know, horrified at the changes that have happened. I think they've happened gradually. I mean, there are certain areas where the change has happened. The one has been for sure that women in ministry has become much more a part of the congregation than it was when I grew up or early in my ministry. Even then, it was not. It was very rarely that we had someone that was a woman that would preach the sermon.
Yeah. I know that right now our church is struggling with things like women in ministry, the question of homosexuality, and a number of other things like that. When the church deals with those kinds of things, do you feel that we still go back to the Bible, or do you feel that we look at what is right in culture to help inform our decisions?
Yeah, the interpretation of the Bible, in some ways, we have interpreted it more on a general rather than on specific proportions or specific. Uh, so I think that we have become a little more general in the way in which we apply the Word of God rather than specifically applying certain verses or certain chapters.
Okay.
I think we've made it more general.
So then instead of applying to a specific sin, we talk about sin as a general concept or a
I
doctrine.
I would think that would be very much the case that we
Okay.
would look at varying spots in the Scripture, and so there's definitely been a change though.
Okay. All right. What sort of challenges do you see today in the church?
One of the challenges is definitely the intergenerational gap that is there. There are some older folks that would certainly like to have the four-part harmony or have hymns, and they miss it when we don't have it. And so and then of course there are the new way of worshiping is more with 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 courses and the likes. I like both. I think both of them have their way, but it can be a struggle for some people to adjust to
Sure.
that change.
Okay. You were talking about the gap between the older side and the younger side. Where do you see that gap coming from? And do you see any way of closing that gap or filling that gap in the church?
I think that gap has always existed, and there always has been that gap that older folks and younger folks will see things differently.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think in many ways we have made the adjustments or made the changes gradually so that it is not a quick change. And I think each side is coming together and recognizing the needs of the others,
Mm-hmm.
and so we have become more unified in that way.
Okay. When I look at our church, for example, we don't really have a lot of young kids. There's a very small amount of kids in the church, and then there's a big break. It almost seems like below my age. There's a spot of maybe 15 or 20 years with not a lot of people. The way that the older generation and the younger generation interact, do you feel that it could be stronger? Do you think that would be part of sort of unifying the church, or how do you see that intergenerational break working?
I think we are making attempts at doing that, even with our fellowship times when we get together of varying ages. I don't know. I think most of the care groups probably are more same age kind of people
Yeah.
that are there. So that's not happening. But I think within the yeah the that trying to trying to see the other side very carefully is
Sure.
an important part, and we always need to keep looking at both sides,
Yeah.
both the younger ones and the older ones, and try and accommodate all of them.
Okay. What about challenges to us as Christians? So not the church specifically, but us as Christians. Where do you find challenges, or where do you see challenges
Yeah,
today?
one of the challenges for sure is the age group that is the from the young to the old. There's a challenge to keeping them together, working together with them. That's a challenge. I see a challenge also in the way in which some people like to take their Bible, and not work at it very exegetically,
Okay.
but more generally. And
Sure.
so I think that bringing that together, getting more people into kind of an exegetical way of looking at the scripture is very important.
Okay, and just to work into the next question, as Christians in our community, where do you see challenges for us working in the community? I know that you volunteer at MCC and you work there and you're engaged with some people at MCC, but other places, what could challenge us as Christians in our community?
Well, I think there are many ways in which that happens. Yes, I do some voluntary work, but I also, for me, sports has been a way in which I can work together with a lot of people. I like to golf or curl,
Okay,
and those are the places where I broaden my image of who I am working with and who I think is important. But I think it is a challenge for the church not to be self-sufficient to itself, but
okay,
keep looking at places where they can be involved in the community. I know we want to be involved in the community, but it's not easy. It's much easier to do that on an individual basis
sure.
rather than as a congregation.
I remember in the 90s, there was this talk of the Christian ghetto where we had our own phone book and we had our own groups that we would hang out with outside of the church. Do you see that that has changed to the better or to the worse?
I think it still is one of the challenges that we continually face. If someone has no way of getting into the community, but I see more and more people enjoying just coffee time with a group of people rather
Sure.
than just with individuals from the church. I like to see that, and I say for me, it's been the sports scene has been the place in which I have been able to broaden my into the community. That's been a very much a part of who I am in the various communities that I've lived in. I've always been very much involved in community activities, whether it was on the town committee or whatever it was. I was so often involved in coaching or those kind of things where I was broadening my image or my keeping me from being just in the ghetto.
Okay. So I guess we sort of answered the question, where should we be engaged? I think of places like we have the pregnancy center here in town. We have the Youth for Christ in town. Um, are there any other places that you know of in town that a person could be engaged?
Yeah, I think there are places where we can do it very much more informally.
Okay.
For instance, where do we eat? Do we always just eat in with a group of our own church people,
Mm-hmm.
or are we okay with meeting with somebody else? And I remember, just going and eating at a place where there's lots of tables and you can just sit where you want
Sure.
with people.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important thing that we don't just keep ourselves to our own people.
Yeah. All right. So, other than the questions that I brought, was there anything else, anything that came to mind while we were talking that you felt you'd want to expand on?
Well, I just think it's very important for us to be involved in community activities rather than just the church.
Okay.
And some of us are so involved in the church that we don't have time for community
Yeah.
activities.
Yeah.
And so I think we should try and balance that out. To me, not in direct leadership anymore.
Yeah.
So it makes it a very different situation for me now, and I can involve myself in sports and in community activities. But it's a challenge for us all the time.
Sure. All right. Well, this has been good. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. I know that we had to chase each other a little bit. We had some problems with emails, but I've really enjoyed this interview. So I'd like to thank you for coming.
Thank you,
Yes.
Wendell. I enjoyed being here.
All right.